Previously on The Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
So I think no one should ever be forced into entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is something when you have a true desire to solve a problem that you obsess about. If you want to do a small good in the world, you start a nonprofit. If you want to do a large good in the world, you start for profit. And here's why. Because profit is the engine that allows you to scale. Those are the people who sit in an audience when Kobe is hitting the 3 after 3, right? Those are the people who always told everyone you can't do it. And when they do it, they are the one who are watching on the sideline saying, I always knew you would do it.
It's nefarious, man. Like, the brain works in fucked up ways.
The mind is one of the most deceiving, manipulative pieces of equipment, flesh, human bodies on earth. I never have trusted my brain.
All of that weight lives in your head, and you are the decision maker.
Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Hi, it's Ronsley. If this is your first volume, welcome. This is a weekly series where I go inside the mind of an entrepreneur, artist, athlete, academic to decipher what is the psychology of our decisions. I'm Australian, and I'd like to acknowledge our traditional custodians of country where I live and work. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge our continuous connection and contribution to land, sea, and community. It's the middle of February 2021. What the? Is it just me, or is everything moving so fast that days morph into weeks and weeks morph into months? Maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe it's because I'm caught in this web that is called Clubhouse. You don't know what that is? Well, it's an audio-only social media chat app. And the only way to communicate is with your voice. Right now, it's only available to those on iOS devices, and it's invite only, so it's not available to the general public. Users have been known to spend hours and hours a day on the app. That includes this user right here. There was a statistic that was thrown around a couple of weeks ago about it being 370% more addictive than any other iOS app. I couldn't find that study when I tried to look for it, but I could find lots and lots of articles about how addictive Clubhouse is. Actually, it is so addictive that in a lot of circles, it is actually called crack house. Anyway, I think I'm like the fish that found the water, and I have to budget myself when I go into Clubhouse. But I'm there, and I enjoy it more than any other social media platform. If you are already there, you can find me at Ronsley, and also look for the Psychology of Entrepreneurship Club. I run regular events under that club, and I think I'm past 20 events now in the last month. So enough about Clubhouse for the time being. My guest today is so amazing that after I interviewed her, I said to my wife, Rochelle, quote, she's done such amazing things. If she was a man, she would have won lots of made-up awards about being the best leader ever. Well, do you know who she is?
My name is Katie Acheson. I'm the co-founder of Numbers and People Synergy, and we're a company that brings big scale data about what's happening in the world together with the experiences of people on the ground. So my particular focus is young people. I'm a super passionate advocate for young people and an ally for the work that young people are doing. And so I suppose my past is that I was the chairperson of the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition, which is a national peak body for young people, and also a CEO of a state-based representation of young people. So lots of words of young people everywhere. I'm very passionate about young people having a say in what happens in the world and decision makers listening to them as experts.
Well, I'm a Katie fan for sure. And you know what? You will be too when you hear what her proudest moment is.
Actually, I'm working with the United Nations on the World Youth Report and talking to young people around the world at the moment. And so I just had this conversation, and a young person asked me what my proudest moment was. And I just have so many. I mean, getting laws changed to reflect what young people were experiencing, working with young people to be heard in Parliament, legal change, like lots of different things. But probably the one that stands out to me is a young woman who became the chairperson of the organization I was a CEO for. And she was the first young Aboriginal woman to do that. But she came to us as a placement position, and she was quiet and super smart and so capable, but just didn't really like the spotlight, didn't like to stand up in front of people. And she used to get really angry at me because I'd push her to do things like, can you just like announce this award, or can you go to these things? And, you know, she went from being somebody who just didn't step forward at all to now just being, she was a chairperson, but she's like nominated for all of these awards, and she works at a university. She's doing this incredible PhD about transforming education to be more inclusive of Aboriginal knowledge and experience. And she just blows my mind. And I was so honored to be what was her mentor, but she mentored me as a CEO, and I was totally mentored by a young Aboriginal woman. And my life changed and my leadership style changed because of her. And she's one of hundreds of young people that have had probably thousands of young people who've had an impact on me. But it's the fact that I had a microphone in my hand and I gave it to her, and she taught me through that. And if I could encourage other adults to do that, is if you have a microphone, it's okay to use it, but maybe just pass it too. And so I consistently hear myself and her say things to me in my head, so I carry her around.
Words. The words we use have a direct impact on everything around us. If you label a feeling excited and someone else labels that same feeling nervous, the events that you experience will differ. The way you look at the world is what makes up the world around you. And if you don't believe me, well, Katie has something to offer.
The language conversation that you're having and that we're having now is just so interesting. Is like, are we actually valuing things the same way? And words do matter. It's very important that we start giving credit where credit is deserved. And is something like calling something soft skills, or saying the weaker sex, or something, being called fragile, or, the words that we use are important. Pronouns in the last 10 years have been a fascinating conversation for people to kind of consider how important is it to use words to identify somebody. And what we've found is that it's really important for somebody's identity and for their feeling of acceptance to be identified in the correct terms. And for many generations, including mine, it was a big deal. Like, wait a second, this is different than what we learned at school. Oh my goodness, we can't handle this. But actually, what young people have shown us, and they consistently show us, is that everything is changed and movable if some fundamental ideas, but if we can change the way we think about things if you just have the right discussions.
Did you know employees who feel like they are genuinely listened to by their managers are nearly 5 times more likely to have high job enthusiasm and 21 times more likely to feel committed to their company than those who do not feel listened to?
Speaking about young people, one of the questions I get asked the most about young people is, Ronsley, do you think universities have a place in today's world, and should I send my kid to university? I'm not sure how I am qualified to talk about that, but I decided that in this instance, I could delegate my response. Katie?
University still has a place, absolutely. I mean, the start of it, back in the dark ages, as it were, the idea of thought and spending time dialoguing and innovating and creating a space where you can challenge the norms of today and dream about the ideas of tomorrow, that is an exceptionally great opportunity and a privilege for people to be able to do that. So I think it still has a very strong place. The idea, maybe sort of the turn of this century, or sort of last century really, where that was what you did to get a job. So if you wanted to be a psychologist, you studied psychology. If you wanted to be a teacher, you went to university and studied teaching. That is a system that was created to try to assist in the workplace, is getting people who are trained, who have the skills and have sort of standards of practice. So it's not a bad thing. Those things are really important. The question is whether the current system is really fit for purpose for what the world looks like now. And there's a lot of research coming out around soft skills and, being able to think creatively, thinking of alternate ideas, interpersonal relationships, those sort of things that aren't necessarily in the books in a university. Those things are really, as far as getting a job, are becoming much more important than the piece of paper. It doesn't mean that the thought that's created in universities is not still necessary. It's just that the way of thinking that there's one track, that there's like this, they call it like a treadmill. You put a kid on the treadmill in primary school or in preschool even, and then they just treadmill all the way to the end for a master's sometimes, or a bachelor's degree. And then at the end, there's this house, golden house with a picket fence and a dog and a cat. And, we know that that's just not the way it works anymore. Instead, it's more like climbing a tree and there's lots of different branches and different ways you can go. And at the end of it, there's going to be different opportunities. There was a report that came out of Australia a couple of years ago that was talking about young people's trajectories. And they said, it's by the Foundation for Young Australians. And it said that there was young people would have 5 careers and 17 jobs in their lifetime. And if you talk to most young people, they know that like, I've just, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I'm going to change my mind. But the rhetoric that's coming from their teachers and often their parents is like, you have to choose this big thing, go to university, choose your profession for the rest of your life. And that just doesn't exist. There's very few young people who are going to have one job for the rest of their life. I mean, it's not even just in developed countries, it's also in the developing world as well, is that there's just opportunities and the world is changing so quickly. The treadmill or the conveyor belt essentially is just not working the same way. We need to start changing the systems so that if you want to go to university and learn a particular thing, that what you come out with is going to help you in one of those many careers that you're going to have.
Listening. Clubhouse, the app I was talking about at the start, I love it because it is like having a talking stick. Only one person can talk at a time, and you have to listen way more than you talk. That's why some people hate being on the app, because they want to talk more than they want to listen. Anyway, less talking, more listening, because everyone has something to teach you. Katie?
Everybody has something to teach you. So I think it's like a 12-step program, maybe Alcoholics Anonymous, that talk about you take the cotton wool out of your ears and put it in your mouth. And like you were saying, so often we're so ready to fight or to have our say that we're not listening. We're just waiting until there's a space that we can speak. And when you really sit and listen to people, the world opens up. It doesn't implode or explode. It opens. And in my job is talking to young people, talking to communities, is consulting with people and helping like world leaders listen to the people who are experiencing what they're talking about. But the privilege of doing that from the sidelines is that I get to sit and listen to tens of thousands of people, and particularly young people who are so rarely heard. Unless you're in their spaces, you don't hear them and their voices. And my life has been completely changed by listening to their expertise. And it's not easy, to shut up as an adult who has a position of power and privilege. It's really hard to listen properly. But as you say, it's, it can change. Like the world can open up if you stop and truly listen to somebody else. And sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, sometimes it takes a couple of hours, sometimes it takes years to really hear what a person is saying, but it's always worthwhile. My challenge personally is to do it with people who I really find disagreeable. There's some people whose politics I don't understand and I really struggle, but really trying to hear the humanity in them and listen for the things that I can have empathy with has changed the way that I feel about them. And I don't just yell at people online and, I was trolled pretty badly for a while there, and people were saying some pretty hateful things. And the natural reaction was to be angry. But actually, what's going on for that person? What can I learn from this? And sometimes it's not really about the person. Sometimes it's just about what can you learn. But listening is such an important thing. Absolutely. But I would have to, I think the answer to your question is that people are experts of their own lives, and the only way you're going to get their expertise is by listening.
There's this gentleman who has a TED Talk about having deep conversations.
Where we have conversations have been the bedrock of great conversational stories. We've heard the ones that happen around a fire, the ones over a meal, the ones where you go on a long walk. They're the ones we remember. They're the ones that are most stimulating of all of them. But I suppose the one that we need to worry about the most is how we have conversations. Every time we think of conversations and we think of the topic of conversations, we only think about, how can I get my point across in this conversation? I bet single one of you were thinking that through this whole presentation, is like, how do I get my point across? But the key to conversations is that you want to go in to listen. Through this journey of starting my podcast, I realized what a rubbish listener I was. I would drift off and not pay attention and come back. And I think that the podcast, by far, the biggest gift it's given me was the ability to listen to my guests with curiosity on my show. It allowed me to realize how many one-sided conversations I was having. Going forward, I would love if we paid attention and put a lot of energy into understanding rather than just being understood. To listen rather than just drive home a point, and to enjoy the to and fro in a conversation rather than just get to a destination where we think this is where the conversation should end. This is where I think the stopping point is. But I suppose the most important thing that I'd love is for us to focus on giving someone a voice that doesn't have one.
That was me. I did that TEDx talk in July 2017. In January 2020, I found out that it was made a TED Talk, and you can find it on the TED.com website, also in the show notes. The point is, I'm loving conversation, especially deep conversations. And I think you can have the best deep conversations with young people. That's what we're going to talk about, well, after these messages.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Our aim with this audio documentary has always been to build a strong community of entrepreneurs and creatives to provide a space where they can use their voice to share their authenticity with the world. As a valued listener, your voice matters too. We love to hear your feedback and ideas, so don't be shy to let us know how we're doing in the ratings and comments. If you have a message for our production team or know someone who would be a perfect fit as a guest, you can find out more information on how to share your input at psychologyofontrepreneurship.com.
Welcome back. When it comes to those deep conversations, mentors and the conversations you have with your mentors are probably the most important ones because they're people you look up to. So even more important is how you pick the mentors you have.
When we talk about mentors, we should talk about experts, and young people are experts in their own lives and are experts in many things that adults aren't. And the system that we have set up for mentorship is often about, I'm an adult, I have life experience, and now I will impart that and you will sit and listen to me. And there is something to be said about a guru-student mentality, because you can learn so much from listening to people with life experience. It's so helpful. But when we're talking about sort of opening up our ideas, it's about who thinks differently, who has ideas and spaces and understanding that's different than mine. And that isn't kept in the bounds of age. So there is a lot to learn from children that we very rarely, I talk about young people not getting listened to. I mean, I think children are probably the most silenced group in our society. It's just assumed that they have no capacity to teach us, and that's really not true. I mean, how often do you find yourself on a video link and loop of listening to a child saying something to a parent or like something funny, and you're like, oh wow, that's really profound. We're treating it like it's not a normal occurrence, but every human has something to teach us. So when it comes to innovation, I think some of the best rooms I've ever been in is like an adult young person partnership model, where everybody's bringing their strengths. So young people bring their agency, they bring their energy, they bring their expertise, and adults often bring the systems, the money, the clout, the social connections to be able to make things happen. And those innovations, that perfect combination of young and old together, and the respect of the fact that both of them are bringing equal. Because I think if you're talking about starting a project, often the investor with their $1 million has more of a voice than the 16-year-old who wrote the code for a tech. And actually that $1 million is worthless without, there's no point in that money without that tech. So you can't have one without the other. But often what we do is, because somebody's younger, we don't listen to them as much. And I love the fact that innovation, when we talk about it these days, isn't just about technology. It's about thought. It's about social structures. It's about systems. And there are lots of examples in the world where countries are completely rethinking the way that they've done their worlds and their communities, and saying it doesn't work for us anymore, we can change. So it's a really scary and exciting time to be alive, because everything right now is possible. And that's often what happens between revolutions, is you have industrial revolution, and on the other side, the technology starts rising up. We've got this moment where we have the parents who are in the mines and the young people who are going into the factories. We've got society and a large group of older people in the world who are very strong on thinking a particular way. And you've got young people. It's the largest generation of young people in the world's population. What an amazing opportunity for the world to completely change. Think about climate change and how much in the last sort of 5 years we've seen just young people driving climate change discussions better than their counterparts who are academics and older and have been doing it for years. It's the young people who are leading the way. That's real innovation for me.
By the way, all the people in your life have influence on you. The words you use in conversation with those people have influence on you. The biggest difference I see between so-called successful people is that they speak the same language but use different words to express themselves. That is why being exposed to as many people and perspectives is important for everyone, especially young people.
Well, there's a lot of good research around the importance of young people seeing options. So I'm going to get it wrong, so I'm not going to quote it directly, but essentially just having one or two people outside of your caregivers that show you a different opportunity will completely change the trajectory of a young person. So they might be sort of seeing themselves only being able to follow in their parents' footsteps, but just having any person who is of stature, like an adult probably for a young person, but having any exposure to just difference really makes it opens up new worlds. And so mentoring programs and, work experience are based on that idea, is that you need to give young people options, that if they've only ever seen like their parents be doctors, they probably won't know that you could be a musician, or that you could start a tech company, or, you could do all these things. So it's so important to give options and opportunities. And I think good school systems do that. They open the world to a young person and show them things. That's not necessarily what every young person's schooling experience has been or will be, but it could be. We could be opening young people up to see the world. But I think something that we don't talk about is that innovation is only spent in is only really possible when you go outside of what you know. So even if we did expose young people to everything that the world exists, that isn't going to necessarily make young people innovative or able to adapt to the new world in the way that we actually have to teach them how to think for themselves, to find and dream up new ideas, to create new spaces. So that not just exposure, but also training in thought and how do you think in a different way than other people have in the past. And that is a fascinating thing. I mean, that's going back to the university question. The original universities were about that. It's about dialogue and intrigue and let's really pull things apart. Because once you do that, you can see the space that is outside of those boxes that we've been put in. And young people's brains are perfectly primed to think outside of the norm because they haven't had all the history and baggage to be bogged down by this is the way it has to happen. They actually can dream outside of it. And sometimes we call that idealism, or we might call that naivety. But actually what it is it's the initial stages of innovation and forethought. This is where the revolution comes, is from ideas that are outside of what we know. And to do that, you have to give enough space. And that for me is an interesting question about what we're setting young people up to when we're pushing them through that treadmill of school systems. Is, are we giving them the muscles to think differently? And we fight it. Like when young people say things we don't like, we silence them. We shut down their platforms. We tell them they're not old enough to understand. And that's just not true. They're just thinking differently than we are or than you are. And it makes you uncomfortable. Just acknowledge that and let them have their say. It might not be right, but it's different. And, we need a bit of difference in the world right now.
In an article by Psychology Today, it states that youths feel genuinely valued when their ideas are actually listened to by the adults around them. When their ideas are taken seriously, they feel like they are being taken seriously as people.
I was talking with Katie how I have such a deeper appreciation for my ancestors and my bloodline and the people that came before me after I started spending time and having conversations with Aboriginal people and elders and leaders.
Spending time with Aboriginal leaders, the elders are it will change your mind on those things. But you're right, is the idea that we could have that I'm the savior of this, or that your generation or you specifically are the one who has the answers. All of this is possible, and because of the people who went before, and it will be where we want to get to will only be possible by learning from them and from their mistakes and from their successes. There's a great roadmap that comes from our ancestors, and there's tragedy. And when you talk about Australia, we have an incredible history of tragedy and triumph and the one, coming together spirit. I'll never forget the marriage equality day. And, for everybody that, sat, there's lots of different sides and there's a lot of different discussions. But the moment of let's celebrate what we know is an important milestone in our country, and everything has just gone on from there as if it was, it was stable and it was going to happen. But actually 10 years before that, there was so much hatred and bigotry that was being spoken in Parliament, and we just don't hear that anymore. And that's because of what the forebears before us did and the people before that, but also the lessons that we have from the fight that happened. It can teach us about what tomorrow can bring and what we can prepare for, because you don't want to just walk in like, oh, I've got an idea and just go willy-nilly. Podcasts, this exact medium is a fantastic way of learning from previous people. I want to start something. I want to do something. Let me hear from people who've done it before, because maybe that'll give me some insight about what to avoid and what to start. And
confused about what she means about the history of our country? This is Mandanara Bales, an Australian Indigenous lady. She explains this in volume 45 of The Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Well, the basic stuff is we need to acknowledge that this country was invaded instead of referring to our history in this country as settlement. It's just sugarcoating things to make white Australians feel good about their own history in this country. So they need to acknowledge their own history and their ancestors, whether they were part of the atrocities, the massacres, the bloodshed, the stealing of children, the raping, the murdering, the horrific things that happen to our people in this country, they need to come to terms with that. We need to start with the truth of what happened when they stood foot on our shore. They don't want to acknowledge it. And when you dig deep into it, I don't know if I would want to acknowledge it either if that was my ancestors.
This part of any country's history is hard to hear, so the population ignores that it happened in the first place and tries to cover it up because it brings up feelings of shame and guilt. History books have been known to be rewritten because of this kind of shame and guilt. But if we don't know how to sit with our feelings of shame and guilt for long enough that they pass through us and don't have power over us, how are we going to teach the young people to do that? Or are we going to just pretend that it doesn't exist? Because right now, if we disagree with something, we either just keep quiet or shout way too loud. President Obama had something interesting to say.
And the problem is that when we get to our politics, for a whole host of reasons, a lot of it having to do with the fact that our media is now splintered. And so some people, they're just watching Fox News. Some people are just reading the New York Times. So they don't even start with a common baseline of facts. They almost occupy two different realities in terms of how they see the world.
Completely disagreeing with somebody for myself is so helpful for my learning. Like if somebody thinks really different than me, I learn so much more than I do when somebody agrees with me because it challenges the way I think. And yeah, I think when we get to those places where we're just trying to listen to the same people, we want to hear our voice just in a loop. It's so dangerous because you can't innovate if everybody just says the same thing and pats you on the back. Like, where are you going to learn? How are you going to change if everybody thinks everything is great? There's always opportunity for making the world a better place. And why would we stop? If it's good now, why would we stop? Because we know that there's so much that needs to be done. And particularly with our history, there's so much that we can do to keep on moving forward as a country together.
Do you know how to disagree in a healthy way?
Are we teaching young people, our children and young people, to disagree with each other in a healthy way? And I think the answer that we can see from evidence is not really. Like, no. Like, you're right, I'm wrong. And Google is 100%. In Google, we trust. Like, it's our God. It's like if Google says it, then it's true. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's a book that people draw in, essentially. Like, you wouldn't open a book in some random house and go, oh, look, this is the exact picture of a desert island that Ronsley was talking about. But, the internet is essentially people just draw pictures on any particular day. And sometimes they erase them and sometimes they change it. Sometimes they pretend like they didn't write, they didn't draw it the day before. There's a lot more to learning about what the truth is. And the best way to start is with the people who know what they're talking about and not necessarily opening some random book by somebody that you don't know and you have nothing in common with, and you don't know where they got that information from. So, yeah, I think if I could change the school system, like apart from universities and the conversation we had before, I'd be really keen to see dialogue, like discussions and debate, and how to have a healthy disagreement with people being taught in schools, and not just about healthy relationships, because that will flow out into people's interpersonal relationships, but also just in business and in society. If you disagree with somebody, how do you actually work through that? And it's not a skill that we're really teaching, but it's a skill that we need now more than ever because the platforms are so big and people's opinions are so out there. We don't know how to disagree with each other. And even for me, in all of my years of, talking to people, I'm a trained social worker, counseling, like I know all of these things. And still, if somebody disagrees or says something that I vehemently disagree with, I'm like infuriated and I get really angry. And then I can't think, and my brain, and I perspirate, and I still have the same reactions that everybody else does. And I've been trained to do it, it's a daily practice, and things like meditation and breathing exercises and things like that, just pausing for a second really help. But we're not really training young people specifically to do it. And I think, as you can see in America right now and in Australia right now, there's a lot of people who aren't taking a breath between saying one comment and responding to somebody else. sometimes we just need to stop and breathe a little bit.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
Coming up on the Psychology of Entrepreneurship.
Psychology of entrepreneurship. Psychology of entrepreneurship.
I interviewed Katie because Katie Acheson is a youth development strategist and a youth advocate. Australian Financial Review named her in their 100 Women of Influence in 2019. She's the co-founder of Numbers and People Synergy, CEO of Youth Action. Youth Action is the peak body for young people and youth services in New South Wales in Australia. They represent 1.4 million young people and the services that support them. Katie Acheson is a key player in issues for young people in Australia. She's also the chairperson of the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition, the national umbrella organization representing over 4.3 million young people. She is a leader of the highest order, a carer of statistical data, and a role model for sure.
Psychology of entrepreneurship.
This is a Must Amplify production. Special thanks to every guest expert that has appeared on the show. Editing, voiceovers, and sound design by Kaylee Bonnyman and Tiago Vega. Guest research by Jenna Elliott. Content by Corinne Castles. Project managed by the legend that is Kaylee Bonnyman. Produced and hosted by me, Ron Slivaz. For more episodes and way to listen, go to mustamplify.com/POE.
Love the polished audio docuseries style of this podcast, The Psychology of Entrepreneurship? At We Are Podcast, you can learn how to create a similar style for your own show. This revolutionary virtual event assembles podcasters, entrepreneurs, and marketers in one spot, so you're able to learn from the masters. Head straight to wearepodcast.com to reserve your spot at our next event. Are you still listening? Here's a little gift to you for sticking around.
I interviewed Katie because Katie Acheson is the youth development. Katie Acheson is a youth development strategist at Youth Advocate.